Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. We are about to begin the study of the next book of the 12 minor prophets. Since we just finished the study of Amos, we are going to move to the next, which is the book of Obadiah or Obadiah. Now, Obadiah is a very short book, not so well known, and it's only one chapter, but of course there is much to learn from this one small chapter. Now, the focus of Obadiah is the focus on the day in the future when the implacable enemy, foe of the people of Israel, the people of Edom, will be destroyed in the future times because of their enmity of the people of Israel. Now, the people of Edom were the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, and they lived in the kingdom of Edom, which one of its most important features was the mountain of Seir, Har Seir. So often the terms Seir and Edom are interchangeable. And this is located in roughly today where southern Jordan and southern Israel is. And they were kind of like a thorn in the side of Israel for many, many years. But Obadiah devotes his entire prophecy to discussing the destruction of Edom. Now, the Jewish tradition has it that Obadiah was a convert to Judaism and he himself was from Edom, which may explain to some extent his significant interest in the people of Edom. Possibly he having followed the right path and chosen the path of righteousness, and his people, though, spurned that path and chose a different path of evil, which might explain to some extent why Obadiah was so obsessed, so to speak, with Edom. It's also noted that this Obadiah appears in the book of Kings in the discussion as the servant of the evil king of the northern kingdom, Ahab. Whether this is the same person or not is somewhat debatable, but assuming that it is the same one, then this Obadiah was the one who saved the prophets of God from the king Ahab and the king Ahab, who was trying to kill them all, and personally made sure to hide them and feed them and protect them. And the tradition has it that God rewarded him with the prophecy, so that a person should convert from the idolatrous nation of Edom and come to serve in the king's house, who the king himself was an evil, idol-worshipping man who tried to slaughter the prophets of God, and then to be the one who, even in that environment, is able to choose the righteous path, gives us a little sense of who this Obadiah was. But I would like to talk a little bit about Edom and the significance of Edom in the words of the prophets and why they are so important. So I'm going to start by mentioning a few places where Edom is singled out for significant destruction. Those of us that studied Isaiah with me may remember the words in Isaiah 34, where Isaiah 34 verse 5, where God is talking, where Isaiah is discussing the punishments that God will mete out in the future against the nations who don't humble themselves before God. This is an extremely graphic and powerful punishment, where it says, "Ki rivso vashamayim charbi." The prophet quotes God saying, "My sword will be drunk in the sky. Hine al Edom tered." That my sword will be drunken. It will be like slaughtering, like in a drunken way, and it will come down on the people of Edom. Vial am chermili mishpat, and my justice will come down on the nations that I have doomed, so to speak. this is for some reason it singles out Edom, and it continues going on in the next verse. Cherev, the sword of God is full of blood. V'tevach gadol, it says in there, tremendous butchery or slaughter, be'eretz Edom, in the land of Edom. And again, Isaiah, it's very graphic and very difficult to read. It sounds so hard. But then again, in Isaiah 63, he begins off by discussing God and seeing image of God coming in clothing full of blood. And God is coming from Bozrah, which is the capital city of Edom. And God says that he is coming from meting out this punishment in Edom. But in those places, Isaiah doesn't explain to us, so what was so bad? Why Edom? Why single out Edom? There's other places where we see this. I mean, if we look for a moment at Ezekiel, also in Ezekiel 25, similarly, Ezekiel also singles out, so says God, because of what Edom has done when they took revenge against the people of Judah, and they sinned that way, therefore I'm going to strike them down, and so on. And it describes again a punishment against Edom. So this Ezekiel gives us a little bit of a hint. It has something specific to do with the relationship between Edom and Yehuda. That's the reason for this singling out of Edom for punishment. Let's go back now in history a little bit and discuss the history of Edom and the relationship to the Jewish people. And with this, we might understand what specifically is so important about the people of Edom. If we go back to all the way back to the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, the story when the Jewish people had wandered through the desert and they were coming towards the land of Israel, and they needed to pass through the land of Edom in order to get into Israel. In that particular chapter, the people had just gone through the death of one of their great leaders, the sister of Moshe, the sister of Moses, Miriam, and then the event of the waters coming from the rock. The people were thirsty, and then they get to the land near Edom and they want to pass through. And Moses sends messengers to the king of Edom, saying, "So says your brother Israel." Remember, referring to Israel as their brother, because they are very close in ethnicity, close in language. We know this from archaeological sources as well. In fact, we find in Edom ancient inscriptions of names very similar to the name that God has, the name of Yud K Vav K, the name which how God's name is written. We find these in writings in the Edomite archaeological finds. So the culture was similar. That they didn't worship God as a monotheistic way, but the traditions, the ideas were things they were familiar with, and they were Semitic. They were cousins, closely related. So Moshe approached them. "So says your brother Israel. You know about all of the suffering that we have went through. We went through the slavery in Egypt, and now God saved us. And please let us go through your thing. We won't bother you. We won't touch your fields. We won't do anything. We'll just go on the road. We won't even leave the road. Nothing." And then, but the king of Edom said, "No, don't pass through my land, because if you do, I'm going to cut you down by sword." And then they answered again and begged him again, "No, we won't even, anything we get from you, we'll buy from you. It'll even be a financial boon. We'll travel through and we'll buy your water, food. No, don't come through." So we see this behavior where Edom was being approached as a brother, but they spurned Israel. Instead of acting like a brother relative should, they acted with vengeance. They acted with hate. So the ones who were the closest to Israel, the ones that had the option and the opportunity to be a help and to be an aid and to learn from each other, chose the opposite path. They chose the path of jealousy, the path of vengeance, and so on. if we move on along in history, and we see Edom in the times of ascendancy, when the Israelite kingdom was strong, and they were worshiping God appropriately, we see that they were able to subdue the Edomites. So if we look at Samuel, in Samuel 2, chapter 8, we see how when King David was at his height, when the kingdom was at his height, he conquered Edom, and they became vassals to the kingdom of Judah, which they remained until later on in history, which we're going to get to in a moment. Then they remained that way through the days of the King Solomon. But then, if we look in Kings 1, we'll see that as soon as King Solomon turned away from God, and the kingdom was weakened because Solomon turned away from God, the first thing that happened was, what did God do? It says in Kings 1, chapter 11, verse 14, it says there that Vayokom Hashem Satan l'Shlomo, God made an enemy to Shlomo. And who was that? Es-Hadad ho-Edomi, this man named Hadad, who was from Edom, who was from the family of the kings of Edom. And then the verses there remind us how David had subdued Edom, but now, as soon as Solomon started veering away from God, Edom immediately sensed that weakness and came in and attacked. We see further on, as we move further on in history, when the king Jehoram, who was the son of Jehoshaphat, was the king of Judah, when in his day, this is in Kings 2, chapter 8, in the days that he chose to turn away from God and weaken the people by starting to again worship idols and so on, the first thing that happened was Biyamav Posha Edom mitachas yad Yehuda, that right away the Edomites rebelled and attacked Yehuda. And in fact, not only did they attack, but Gam hu asa, as we see in Chronicles by the same story, that he went and he built in Yehuda altars to the idols. So Edom has this thing where whenever he senses weakness, he attacks, rather than having pity on, or rather than working with the brother, the ones that they're close with. They find their weakness and attack. This pattern of behavior is alluded to when we just learned the book of Amos. If you recall, in the book of Amos, in chapter 1, he addresses Edom, and he says, I can forgive Edom. God says, I can forgive Edomites for everything, but on the fourth thing, I cannot forgive them. What is that? Al rodfo b'cherev achiv v'shiches rachamav. Instead of having mercy on his brother, he went ahead and chased his brother with sword. This is something that I cannot forgive. When you are close with someone, and you have the ability to be influenced for good by them and to influence them for good, because you're close, you're the one that should be the closest with them. You should be the closest allies, but instead you turn against them. This is the sin of Edom, and this is what makes Edom so outrageously evil that they could not be forgiven. If we move on, I would like to, of course, quote from the Psalm 137, which is a reference to the destruction of the Babylonians, the kingdom of Israel. The psalm says the people cried and they asked, and the psalm ends with the request for vengeance against Edom. Ha'omrim aru adei yesodba. The people of Edom who said, go destroy it, go destroy it. This is a reference to what happened at the end of the first temple, when it was the Babylonians that destroyed the kingdom, not the Edomites. But the Edomites cheered them on and egged them on. This again, Edom had a chance to ally themselves with Israel and help defend their brother, and instead they chose to egg on the enemy. In a similar way, we find when the Assyrians invaded Judah, the Edomites did the same thing, and they betrayed they initially told the kingdom of Judah that they would help fight the Assyrians, but they ended up fighting alongside the Assyrians and betrayed the people of Judah. So we see this pattern repeating itself over and over again. The of Edom being the ones that should be close, but they're not. This, of course, is alluded to in the book of Genesis when Jacob was giving. When Isaac was giving the blessings to Jacob, thinking that he was Esau, and then Esau came in after Jacob left, and Isaac told Esau that, I don't have any blessings left for you, and then Esau begged him. The blessing that Isaac gave Esau reads as follows: that you will live in a place of fat of the earth, and you'll get from the dew of the heavens, and you will live by your sword, and you will serve your brother, and it will be that when you rebel against him, you will throw his oak from your neck. In other words, Isaac was predicting that the descendants of Esau were going to be in this sometimes subservient to Jacob, and sometimes they would rebel against Jacob, and this set up a stage for a fight that lasted for centuries and centuries and centuries. Now, there's another aspect to Edom which I would like to draw upon, which is very closely related, and that is, if we look back in Isaiah 21. Isaiah was in this section of Isaiah, he was addressing the various nations of the world. But when he addresses the nation of Edom, it's very small. He only talks, there's two very cryptic verses. And when we studied Isaiah together, I gave an explanation, which I'm going to repeat again now. It says, Masa Duma, the burden of Duma, of Edom, they call to me from Seir, and they ask me questions. This guardian, and I'm translating it the way I translated it then. You can go back and listen to that podcast for more detail. But this guardian, God, what is it of the night? Why is it? And I translated this as follows: why is it that evil can come from him? You are teaching us. This is what Edom is asking. Some of the most basic questions of theodicy, which are, you're telling us there's such a thing as monotheism, that God is one. Yeah, it's okay, we can understand that there's this God, that God, but you're telling us that God is one. If that's the case, that there is one shomer, one watchman, then why is there nighttime? Right? And then they repeat the question, shomer ma milel, why is it that there is a night? Why could there be darkness coming from this one God? It makes no sense to them. They should only, and then his answer was, Omar Shomer, the guardian says, no. They both come from God. Also voker, morning light will come, vigam laila, and also night will come. And imtivayun, if you have questions, Isaiah tells them, ba'ayu, it is okay to ask those questions. Shuvu esayu, come ask questions. But the Edomites refused to ask questions, but rather they decided to throw out the idea of monotheism. And whenever given the opportunity, as we've seen so far, whenever given the opportunity to learn better, they did the opposite. They tried to push onto Yehuda the idea of polytheism, which, as we know from all of our studies, comes from their arrogance. Now, we see this. This was my interpretation, or our interpretation, of those verses in Isaiah, but we see this again several times hinted to in some other places as well. Jeremiah, when he talks about the destruction of Edom, he curiously, but now maybe not so curiously, refers to the ideas and philosophies of Edom, which is unusual, because when he's criticizing the other nations, Jeremiah there, one day hopefully we'll get to study it too. This is in chapter 49 of Jeremiah. He talks about their evil ways, their evil deeds. But when he talks about Edom, he says, and this is verse 7, chapter 49, La Edom, to Edom, so says God, Ha'ein od chachma b'teman, is there no more wisdom? Avda eitza mibanim, did knowledge get lost from the children of Nisrcha chachmasam? Their entire body of knowledge and wisdom has gotten rotten and stale. So, and then it continues with that idea, with the idea of the knowledge, with the philosophy of Edom as being the cornerstone of their problem. They had a problem with the idea of monotheism. They didn't understand it, and therefore they rebelled against it. This is not just in Jeremiah, but this also we're going to read in the next podcast. When we read Obadiah, we'll see the same thing. In verse 8 of chapter 1 of Obadiah, it says, Halo Bayomu, on that day God will say, I am going to get rid of those wise people, the scholars of Me'edom, Chachamim Me'edom, Utevuna Me'ar Esau, and the understanding, in other words, the ideas that they represent. So this is what Obadiah is talking about when he's talking about the heresy of Edom, and this then becomes it's not just, it gets to be much deeper than just a philosophical argument, but they take it into their physical hands and they fight against the people of Yehuda in order to profess their philosophy. So now I think we have an understanding as to what the significance is of this particular battle between Edom and Israel, and why it figures so much in the words of the prophets, as we have mentioned. It figures so much because, number one, it signifies the battle between the ideas and the arrogance of the polytheists versus the monotheists, versus the entire idea that Judah and Israel stands for. That's number one. And number two, they are the ones who were most able to absorb the ideas of monotheism. They are the ones that were most able to act like brothers, but instead they chose to act like enemies. They were the ones that should have learned, but they didn't. And instead they chose to fight. So thank you for listening to this introduction. In the next podcast, we're going to go ahead and study Obadiah together.